Hello and welcome to Art and Self. I am Cindy Ingram, your host and the founder of Art Class Curator, Curated Connections, and the Art and Self Connection Circle. And I'm also the author of the new book, Art is About Being Whole, a Memoir. This is the podcast where we experience the range and depth of what it means to be human, seen through our connections and conversations about intriguing works of art. These art conversations are here to show you that art is here for you as a catalyst, a challenger, a coach, and a comfort. If you love listening to these insightful conversations and want more connected content about connecting with art, I invite you to check out my new book, Art is About Being Whole, coming out on October 31st, 2023. You can get more information and sign up for book updates at artisaboutbeingwhole.com. Hello, welcome back to the Art and Self podcast. Today, I am joined with a repeat guest, Heather Doyle Fraser. Hello, Heather, welcome.
Hello, I'm so glad to be here.
I am so glad that you're here too. We are recording this pretty much exactly 1 week from my book being released, our book, because Heather was such a pivotal role in helping me write it. And I thought that what we could do today is sort of talk about the process of creating this book and where it came from and how it developed, because it was a really revolutionary process for revolutionary both probably process for me, and also it started at such a different place and ended at somewhere I never would have imagined. So that's what we're going to do. So before we start, Heather, do you want to just kind of give a little intro of yourself and what you do and that sort of thing?
Sure. My name's Heather Doyle Fraser. I am a publisher, editor, coach. I'm the founder of the Compassionate Mind Collaborative. And it's my mission to bring compassion to the writing process. And I help people develop their books from the inception of an idea to all the way through publish. So I have a team of people that I work with and all the aspects that you would find in a traditional publishing company, but in a hybrid publishing setting.
Yeah, and I cannot, and I told this to Heather 100 times, but I cannot recommend working with Heather highly enough. Like if I had to pick one person on the planet who I'm like, if I would pick one person to recommend, it would be you, just for anything. I'm just Heather. Heather's the best. So from the development, you're just brilliant, a brilliant writer, and you, the way you see patterns and the way you are able to bring out the genius of the person you're working with and notice things about them that they don't even see in themselves and all of that, which we'll talk about here in a bit. But if someone listening is really interested in writing a book and you're scared of the process, Heather is perfect for that situation, because you will feel so safe in her care. Okay. I will probably rave about her a few more times in this episode because
well, I'll be raving about you as well. So
yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give a little history of the book. I know I've talked about on the podcast bits and pieces, like little parts of this story, and in other podcasts too. But this book really did start in its original inception. It was going to be more of an art education book, because I have an art education business, and I've developed this theory, this sort of philosophy of education on how to connect people with works of art in sort of a deeper way beyond just kind of learning about the art. And so my original thought of this book was going to be about, okay, how do we get people to have powerful aesthetic experiences, emotional experiences in front of works of art? Like, how do we prime them for that? Or how do we prepare them for that? And so I started, this was, I should look up those interview dates, but this was a few years ago. And I'll be able to pull up the interview dates really fast by just typing in a certain person's name that I interviewed, because it'll pull up on the Shirley. Okay, it was in 2020, in June of 2020. I had a series of art experience interviews. And what I was going to do is I was going to have a chapter. Each chapter was going to be a sort of a self-contained thing, and it was going to be start with someone's story about an aesthetic experience they had, and then I was going to talk about like what was it about the art that caused that experience and that sort of thing. So I interviewed all these people, and I was like, that isn't working. I was like, these stories are not what I wanted them to be. So I took your so then I was like, okay, I'm going to do all this research. I hired a research assistant, and I was going to like have a chapter on curiosity and how art helps curiosity, and a chapter on um, what happens in the brain when you look at art, and a chapter, I had all these like researchy things. And that was a thing that went on for a while until I started to really think about, and this kind of culminated in, I'm probably bouncing all over the place right now, but it was in June 2021 is when I took Heather's course, The Compassionate Writer. Would you want to explain what that course is real fast?
Yeah, it is. So the Compassionate Writer is it's a program that was born out of the work I do one-on-one with clients when I first start working with them. So it's the foundation of the work that we will do on their book through the whole process. And it starts with like, why are you doing this? Who is your reader? Who do you need to be to engage in this journey? And then like going forward a little bit more, like what is your book plan? How can we create that in a way that doesn't feel threatening? Because all of this is undergirded by compassionate practice in writing. And often it causes a threat response, which looks to some like writer's block, but that's your body and your whole system saying, hold on a second, this is too vulnerable. I'm scared to do this, or I'm feeling resistance around this for some reason or another. So we incorporate all of this compassionate practice and strategy into the writing process, because I feel that writing a book is all about relationship. Your experience with a book is all about relationship. Cindy and I have talked about this so much because it's similar to your experience with art. Like, when you're writing a book, I feel like you're cultivating a relationship with yourself, with the content, with your ideal reader. And depending on the genre, like there could be like multiple characters you're including. So but the whole thing is about relationship. And in order to have a relationship and cultivate that, you have to have trust. And in order to cultivate trust, you need to feel safe. And in order to feel safe, you need to have compassion for yourself and the whole process. So that program is a 6-week program that starts and gets you on the journey, and those pieces you will use throughout the whole process of writing a book.
Yeah. Oh, I never heard. I'm sure I have heard you say the whole the relationship piece, but the way you said it just now is exactly the way I talk about people's relationship with art too. And I'm like, that is exactly like the same thing. It's like relationship with the art, with the other people looking at art, with the artist, with you, with all versions of you. I mean, that was really,
yes,
that was cool. Yeah, and that has been probably not necessarily that course, but just that sort of compassionate approach has is what allowed me to create what I ended up creating, because it was very, very challenging to write a lot of the things that I wrote, and to leave in things that feel really vulnerable to leave in, and to process things that I hadn't maybe yet had processed and process them in a different way. And if I was doing this on my own, I don't think I would have been able to get to that level of depth. But because I see you like nearly every day in writing practice, because not only did I take that course, but I'm in Heather's writing group, like having that sort of reminder pretty much daily that like this is normal, you're safe, everything's fine, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, like that was all really, really beneficial. So Um, and it was so, it was, yeah, it was just sort of a subtle attitude to the whole thing that just kind of kept me really grounded in the process. Um, yeah, so at this time I took the writing or the compassionate writer, and then I was also working with someone named Yola, who's a healer who's been on the podcast before too, and she's also mentioned in the book. Um, and we spent a lot of time voxering back and forth about like my work and what I'm really here to do, and I was really kind of going through it at the time. So if you've read the book already, this is like the time when like I didn't know what my business was doing, and I was kind of in that bug soup and that goo of trying to figure out what I really wanted. And so I, through working with Yola and in that compassionate writer class, I started to really kind of formulate, okay, no, this book should not be about other people. These other interviews I did, like they don't have any place here. This should be about my experience with art, because that really is like what I have to bring to art is different than a lot of people's experience with art. And so I started to think about, okay, well, let's just make it my experience of art. And so then I was going to do, each chapter was going to be a theme. Like it was going to be like, I had one on compassion. I had one on shame. I didn't have one on shame. I had one on social anxiety. I had a whole authenticity. I had a whole book's worth. And then I started writing this book and wrote a good, over that portion of it, a year, 50,000 words, which is about what my book is at now. So what I thought was my book was about done. It was near done, and it just needed to be, I knew it wasn't done. I knew that there was some stuff wrong. Well, not wrong, but
not wrong.
Yeah. I knew that there was something off. So that's when I started to work one-on-one with Heather. I had 50,000 words written of this half art education book, half theme approach that was kind of memoir-like. And then I come in, I'm like, okay, this is what I have. And in our very first call, we like Heather saw it and it, like put a pin in exactly what the book was. And then you want to tell your version of that part? Because I feel like I'm rambling at this point. tell your version of this meeting.
Yeah, I remember our first call, and you said, I have 50,000 words. I'm just about there. It's not quite feeling, I know that there's still some work to do, but I don't think it's not that far off, I don't think, but I know there's something off. And so then I said, okay, let's just take a back step for a second and tell me why you're writing this book again, and who your reader is, and went back to those basic questions. And in the answering of those questions, it was really clear, oh, this current version of this book isn't connecting to the why as much, and it's not connecting to the person as much. And when I think specifically when I said, what is the main takeaway you want your reader to have, like while they're reading the book and then after they're done reading the book? And that's when it changed right there. You started with the, I'm getting a little like chills right now, even thinking about it. You basically came into the idea of the art is about being whole, which became the title. But I mean, you didn't say exactly those words, but that was the essence of it.
Yeah. I remember I said something and you summarized. So you're like, so is it art on the path to wholeness, I think was.
Yes.
And I was like, yes, that's what it is. And it was in that moment I realized I had two halves of two different books.
Yes, you were trying to still straddle that like art education a little bit, and the personal. You were trying to straddle it, and it wasn't. You were straddling. It wasn't working.
Yeah, and so because it was trying to be two things at once, neither side was very successful at what it was trying to do either. So we cut the first half. I mean, like within a day, I'm sure I did it like the minute we got on the call, I went and like slashed half the book. But the first half I realized through kind of reflection was really a lot of me trying to explain myself, explain one, why this method I have is valuable, um, providing a bunch of caveats for people who might have a problem with why I approach art the way I do. And I do have people that do. They don't like that I put myself into other people's art. And so, I had several chapters on that. Major patriarchy stuff, cultural arts. So like there was just all of these things. But in the end, like the goal of those things wasn't, when looking back on it, wasn't to show the power of art or what I was really trying to do. It was really to keep people from criticizing me.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we talk about, that I talk about with all my clients is if you know what that main message is, and then you look at your book outline and there's portions of it that don't serve that main message at all, that's a clue that it's not that these are bad things that you've written about, but they don't belong in this book. That's not this book. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was at that point too that we looked at the last half, and I would say, I don't know a percentage, but most of that last half probably did not end up in the book either. There were many chapters cut from that too, because they were still a little too teachery. And it was at this point where we're like, this is actually a memoir. And I remember that
not your typical memoir.
Oh no. Yeah. But once I was like, oh, this is a memoir, like that, I remember just that feeling was both so like terrifying, like, who am I to write a memoir, but also so like clarifying. And like, of course it's a memoir. Like, how could it have ever been anything else? It was just like this moment of like pure truth that I was like, okay, well, and there's a lot of moments like that working with Heather where you're like, you don't want it to be the right answer, but you're like, oh shit, this is the right answer. Like, this is the thing. This is the right thing. And so it's like exciting and clear and perfect, but also just like a little bit scary, which is where that compassion piece, I think, comes in.
Mm-hmm. And knowing that, like, when there are pieces that you don't want, you think you write it and you're like, I don't know, I don't want to share this. Then you have all the agency to say, no, I'm not going to share that piece. That's just for me.
Yeah. And also the other way around is like, there are things that at the outset, I was like, no, I can't include that. That's too personal. But because the process felt so safe and I felt like so good about what I had written, that I was like, well, that has to be in there if I really am going to tell this full story. Like the chapter that about my husband is the one in particular, like that was never going to be in the book. There was no way I was going to include that in the book. And then once we had like most of the book written, I was like, this is missing a really important piece. And then I was talking to people in my real life who were like going through similar things. And I was like, this would really help them. Like, can I get over my fear? Can I get over like all of that and share something so personal? So it was like, yeah, I worked both ways. There are some things that didn't make it in and some things that weren't ever going to be made in that made their way in. So it's fascinating, this process.
Yeah. And it is a process, because like what you are feeling when you're writing is, oh, someone is going to see this, but they're not seeing it right now. They're going to see it like in a year or two. But you have that feeling of like, oh no, I don't know. And you're really not sharing it right now. So and it goes through so many iterations. I say this all the time about how writing is such an iterative process. It's not like you write one draft and it's done. You go through. And so you give yourself time to let that sink in and say, do I want to include this? Do I not? What's missing? What is too much? Like, you have that license there. And if you sped through it, you wouldn't. But taking the time to create the book that is really inside you, that gives you that opportunity.
Yeah, that is so different than how I've ever worked, this process of writing this book, because everything I've ever done has been done quickly. I have an idea and I make it happen right away. And I'm like, ship it, let's do it. You know, it's like things are all just flying out of me onto the computer, onto the internet. Like I work so quickly. Um, and that's one of the reasons, like I maybe always had a curiosity about writing a book, but I didn't think that I really had the patience to write a book because I like to get things out. I like to finish. I'm a doer that likes to get things done. And so this idea that it would take so long to be finished really was scary to me. But now that I've done it, like I just that process of taking my time on something has taught me so much because the book was going to be first, it was going to be released in like January. And then I was like, okay, then we didn't make that. So I was like, because we cut half of the book. And then I was like, okay, and
that was decided like
March.
in the first, we decided like no for January, like in the first discussion.
Yeah. And then it was March. And then it was like, okay, April, definitely April. And then I was like, okay, if it's not April, it's definitely going to be June. And then at one point I remember I'm like, it's going to come out whenever it comes out, you know? And like, I remember just that, like, I just decided to let go of whatever like deadline at some point, and that was I felt so good doing that. Yeah, I think it was like March or April when I was just like, you know what, it's just going to come when it comes. I was like, and I was enjoying the process so much too that I didn't care because I was like, I just love this. Like I could do this every day for the rest of my life and just be happy as can be, you know? So
well, and you didn't take that long, actually.
No, I didn't.
By comparison, I mean, like
True.
you really didn't take that long. But, and I will say that you employed that like doer mentality in the multi-phase process that this is. So like you had significant movement a lot. You would, like you said, that after that first call, you were like, okay, half the book gone, and like moving on. But it is a longer, it's like a slow process. It's slower process than other things might be.
Yeah. And I don't think I think too, because I never knew it was a memoir. Um, Before I thought it was a memoir, it was going to be personal, but it wasn't going to be too personal. You know, it was like very controlled personal. I could just tell these very specific stories and not tell them everything. Um, and then once it became a memoir, I still wanted to follow that kind of quick pace until I realized how emotional it was to have to go through my entire history and write about it, because I had to remember I had to remember everything, and then to be able to write about it authentically and like how it really felt, I had to feel all of those feelings again. So if you read those books and you're reading about like how much pain I was in that time, like I had to feel that again to write it. And so was unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, I would say anyone who is writing about something personal, they're at some point when you're writing a book like that, you're living your book at some level, and that's really hard. And that's another place for compassion in that process.
Yeah, and that's when I really just realized I was like, I need lots of support. I had Heather and I had my writing group, but that's when I went back to therapy. I'd been in a while, and started to go to therapy, and really like took a lot more. I think I scaled back my other work a lot too, because I just needed more space to like get through all of it. Because not only did I had to relive it, but it's like life would throw me these situations that were just like what I was writing about. Yeah. I'm like, why, what is happening here? But every chapter, something got thrown my way.
Yep.
So I'm both processing the past and the present at the same time.
In a new context, but the same, like a similar lesson in the same context. I mean, a different context. And I think, so that's like the difficult, those are the real difficult pieces. But then there's these moments of serendipity that I know that you had, like when you were reading a book and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this book and now I'm writing this chapter. This is awesome. Yes. Like there are things like that too.
Yeah, true. Like every book I read during the time when I was like writing, during the editing process, and not a lot of books made it in. Well, some of them did, but like some influence from whatever I was reading made it into the book in some way. And that was so fun. Like the Jaws chapter, which I think is probably the most serendipitous of all of them. Like it would not happen, would not, I don't think, I don't know, maybe sharks would have appeared some other way, but I was reading Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt, and there was a line in there, and I'm a highlighter, so I always like to pick out these little sparkly lines, and this line that said, she understands what it's like to not stop moving lest you stop breathing, or something like that. And I was like, that caught me really off guard. And I was like, oh yeah, me too. I was like, in fact, I'm writing about that right now, So I put that line, and then I was like, do sharks? So then I went on a whole like rabbit hole about sharks and learning about, do they have to keep moving to keep breathing? And it's true for not all sharks, but for most sharks, they have to move to breathe. And then so that line made it in that chapter. I don't even remember what the art was at this time for that chapter.
It wasn't what it is now.
It wasn't what it is now. And so then I'm like, do. And then like, I was like, sharks. So then sharks kept appearing all over the place, like all the time. And then I had the idea for the shark of the Jaws poster. And it was just, I remember just like giggling and laughing and just like telling everyone I knew. I was like, can you believe this? I read this and now this artwork is perfect. And then writing it was such a delight, because like all the metaphors, the lighthouse and the sand and the red flags and the swimming and the endorphins and the adrenaline of the swimmer, like I had the most fun of my life writing that chapter.
And then the other sensory aspects of it too, like, because you could, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, the music. Like I got to listen. Yeah. I listened to that Jaws song all the time. I was just in my car listening to the Jaws song, listening to it, and just listening to the music then would spark ideas for what I could write about. And it was so fun. Mm-hmm. So it was like I was living my connection to art through this book too. And that's like the whole other narrative of the writing of this book, is like how the art played a part at each role. I mean, of course, their art plays a part now in the final product, but like the way the art came in and out of the book in different ways was really exciting too. That was the most exciting. But I think the first exciting one was the two Fridas, because I thought that chapter was going to be about my social anxiety. And that's what happens when you start writing about something. You think the thing that you're dealing with is social anxiety. So you start to write a chapter about social anxiety. I started to try to find art about social anxiety. Nothing felt quite right. I think it was Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth that was in there at one point. I was like, that's partly right. But it's like the more I wrote, the more I realized that social anxiety was not my problem. It was a symptom of shame. And once I realized that, then it's like it became a lot. And then at the same time, I had a podcast episode with Allison Crow about the two Fridas, where we talked about it all. And then it was just like, because of her book launch. And then it's like kind of all of these pieces started to come together and create that, like, probably, I have a lot of favorites, but that might be my favorite chapter. And it was from then on that it became like, I think I knew what I was writing, because once I wrote that chapter, I was like, I know what I'm doing now. And I could model everything against that chapter. I'm like, does this do what the two Fridas chapter does?
Well, and I think that's the time that we shifted from these like we didn't have like thematic chapters anymore at all. It wasn't like, curiosity. I mean, we knew this was a memoir, but we were still under the kind of guise of some themes going through, even though they were going to be a chronological thing. And I think that's when we started leading with the art.
Yeah. And that is a message that I have gotten in my life over and over and over and over again throughout my whole life, that anytime I ever start with anything other than the art, like that's not when things go well. Like that sort of failure I talk about in the book in the last chapter, like that didn't start with the art, it started with themes. Like there's other things in my life that like they started with something else, and then I was trying to plug art in, and that didn't work. But when I start with the art, and if I just let the art guide me, then I can't really go wrong. So it's all about picking the right art. And that's true of teaching too. Like I never went into a lesson saying, okay, I'm going to teach about this, and so I'm going to use this artwork to teach this. I'm like, I bring the artwork and then let the artwork do the rest. The artwork takes over. It just does whatever I want it. You know, the kids pick up on what I want them to pick up on. And so it's really just about finding the right piece of art and then writing from the art. Anytime I just wrote from the art, I was fine.
And I remember there was a point at which I suggested you put all the arts on, like, so you could see them.
Yes.
And there was something about that changed too.
That's when we took out Gail's her first name, with the birds and the strawberries. What's the name of that artwork?
Oh yeah.
I can't remember the name of the artwork. How funny. That was like all I thought about for weeks, because I was like, how do I even write about this? But now I can't remember the name of the artwork. Gail Gibbs. Is in a magic birds. It was the magic birds. Yeah, and I had them all. I taped them all up on my door, and I would just sit here at my desk and look at them. And you could see, you could really see the flow. And that's when I started to be able to notice the structure of like the artwork at the beginning was like two people split. And then it became there became this moment of like accepting of herself and wholeness. And you could kind of see the journey through the art, even though they're all so different. You could just see the thread of the whole book. It was like the Cento poem from the end is like all on my wall visually. I finally took them down because they were all wrong. At one point I stopped updating it, and so things were moving too fast there for a few minutes. But yeah, and that was something you had to remind me of a lot over and over. It was like, go back to the art. Go back to the art. Like anytime I would get like what writer's block, or I would get stuck or whatever, I'd be like, okay, just start writing about the art and see what happens.
What is the art? Where are you with the art? Go back to the art every time.
Yeah. And I could talk every single chapter like this. This will take too long if I go through every chapter, but I'm like, this is the next chapter, but I won't go through every single chapter. But the self-portrait naked with my mother chapter was right after Two Fridas. And that one to me was really scary because it was about my relationship with my mother. And it was also about my relationship with my body. So it was like two really charged things for like, I could guess at some percentage of women, but like a lot of women have charged things around their mothers and their bodies. And I'm trying to tackle.
Well, we all have mothers and we all have bodies for sure. So
yeah, no one has this like perfect, like,
no,
maybe they do. I mean, my daughters have a perfect mother, but I mean, I don't know about everybody else.
Well, mine too. Yeah.
Obviously. She says, I say as I like ignore them all the time because I'm writing books. Yeah, that one was like, I felt like I struggled to write that until I just looked at the artwork and okay, let me just write about what I see. And then I would just start describing it. I started describing the emotions of it. And then it was like, oh, I know what I'm doing. You know, it was amazing. And it shows the power of what art can do for us. We just let it. Okay. So I'm back at therapy, reliving all the things. I get through part one, and part one really was about my past. You know, it was about like my 20s, mostly my 20s, early 30s, and I'm 42 now. And I had already spent a lot of time processing my past. I've gone to a lot of therapy. I've done all the things where I've told all the stories of the past a lot. Like it's one of those things like, okay, I've got that covered. It was when I got to part two, though, that was when it was stuff I had learned, but I had not ever talked about how I learned it or processed it really, it was just like, I know I'm a different person. I know I've learned all this stuff about emotions. I know I feel so much better. There's all this stuff, but I was like, I didn't know how to write it. So part two felt the hardest. And I remember coming to you, and we would have our calls. When you work with Heather, you get 3 calls a month. And I was like, I don't know how to write this because it doesn't have a narrative. I was like, there's no story to tell. It's just, I learned how to feel my feelings, but I don't have a story around that. It was just, I just practiced it a lot. And that's when you dropped a big bomb.
Dropped a big one right on me.
It was a really huge bomb.
So, and I'll tell you why I dropped this bomb. One of the things that I noticed in reading Cindy's book and all the drafts that I've read and everything was the lyrical quality of her writer's voice. And there were aspects of that where I felt like I am reading poetry right now. This is so lyrical, and I love her voice. And so I mean, I said those things, but I was just sort of holding that kind of close to my heart a little bit. And then when she said, I don't know how to express this, I said, have you ever written poetry before?
You probably thought you were just giving this like innocuous little suggestion. Like, what about poetry?
Well, the reason I didn't start with like, Cindy, why don't you incorporate poetry? I started with, have you ever written poetry? Because I wanted to like ease in. I knew it would be a yes. How could it not be a yes? Come on. So I knew that answer was going to be a yes. And I knew it probably felt uncomfortable because as someone who writes poetry and loves poetry, it feels a little bit like, ooh, poetry. So I knew that would be a little edgy, but I also knew it had to be a yes in terms of you had done that before. I could just tell from your voice. And I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, it was a very strong reaction. And it was just like, it was not unlike the reaction to Girl Before Mirror. Like when I saw that painting for the first time, it was this, and if you haven't read the book, that's in the book. So you can read about that. But it was like a punch in the stomach. Like it was not a bad punch, you know. It was just like it was that overwhelming, like I think I started crying like almost immediately.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just starting to cry and thinking, I'm like, now this is it. I'm trying to put myself back in that position because this process has been a lot of me returning to things about myself that I had forgotten. And, you know, the other story kind of, which we kind of get to at the end of the book, is that I had started making art again at this time. And so I had already, I think this happened in like February-ish or March, but one of those times. And like, so I've been making art for a few months and like that felt good. I was like returning to like, I used to make art as a kid, but one of the things I really completely forgotten is that I used to write lots and lots of poems when I was a kid. Like I wrote, and I still have like 2 full, like, you know, those yellow notepads, like completely full of my poems and my like loopy, messy kid handwriting. And so many poems. A lot of them were about boys, but a lot of them were about like how sad I was and about like my, you know, my dad leaving and all this stuff. And like all of that was in there. And up until high school, I had poems in there up until high school. One of them was funny. I remember writing it for school, but it was about my love of the dash, the punctuation mark, the dash. And then I looked and I was like, I do use the dash a lot still today. I'm like, that's living on. But yeah, it was just this like this sudden knowing of, yes, this is a truth that I can't ignore. It's a subtle knowing of like remembering, and also like overwhelming terror of like knowing it's true, but now I should put poems in my book, and should being like, I didn't have to do it, and,
No.
and you said a
I
million
said that
times,
many times.
many times, you're like, you don't have to do this. And I was like, yes, I do. I know I don't have to, but I do. Like, I knew, like, it was one of those, like, I knew every part of me knew I had to. And
Well, and the thing about poetry is that it allows you to express deep, deep emotion
yes,
in without explaining yourself at all. You can't explain yourself with it.
yeah,
And so it worked really well for those pieces
it
because it
did.
allowed you to express the emotion that you were trying to convey, and too many words were getting in the way of that.
Yeah. And there's a podcast episode coming out in next week, I think. It's on the Good Business Switch. But one of the things she said to me, she read the book before the interview, and she was like, I felt it. She was like, but I didn't know why. And it was something like that. I don't remember the exact word she said, but I was like, that's it. I was like, you got the feelings came across, but I didn't have to explain the feelings. I was like, that's what art does. I didn't have to explain it. Yeah. So I started writing poetry. And it was really fun. The first one I wrote was in the book, it's the Rested Heart poem at the beginning of part 2. And I had so much fun writing it. And then me and you like had a meeting where we just worked on it together. And so I learned a lot about like, you put me through a poetry masterclass, just, through a couple meetings of just like, oh, what if you put an enter here? Or what if you change this word to that word? Or you'd point out where the language matched the cadence or whatever, or the rhythm matched the rhythm in the artwork, or, you would point out things like that. And that process was super fun.
I loved that.
Yeah, me too. I'm like, that was like the best. That was our best coaching goal, was like working on that poem. That was so fun. But then I was like, okay, I have these poems now in part 2. I was like, well, what if maybe I need to go back to part 1 and write some poems? So I'd read through, and then I just noticed there were already poems there.
Well, that's why I suggested it in the first place.
And I was like, oh, Heather knew what she was talking about. I was like, this is a poem. I was like, enter, done. Look, I already have it written. I just had to like put them on different lines. Like that's all it was. It was really freeing. Like, I feel like that really unlocked this thing, like any box that I was going to put this book in, or any shoulds that I feel like, the book should be this way or that way, or I shouldn't do this or shouldn't do that. Like, those rules just kind of vanished when we started to add poetry in. And then I was like, I can do whatever I want. That was exciting.
And it just made it so deliciously you.
Yeah.
It just made it so you. It's so great.
Yeah. I got an email today or yesterday from one of the Amazon, or like one of the early readers. And she was in one of my circles. So she spent some time with me, and she was like, it's just like having a conversation with you, is what she said. She was like, that's what it feels like to her. And I was like, oh, that's lovely. That's a good compliment, I think. I mean, I guess it's fun to have a conversation with me, whatever. But it felt like the fact that it is so me, and that I was able to do that. It's exciting. And then I read a few books that like used poetry, like Maggie Smith's book, and You Can Make This Place Beautiful. And then I read Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine or Bernadette. I get it wrong every time. I think it's Bernadine Evaristo. And like they both used, and N.K. Jemisin too. But they both like used poetic language in their in just their paragraphs, and like just watching the way they chose to format things or for structure things, or like was really fun for me too, to just study like what they did, and they would give me ideas for something that I could do. And so that was a really fun process too, just like taking inspiration from these books, and not copying them, but just taking something that worked well, that I think would work well in mine, and playing with it. It felt really playful after we introduced poetry. So yeah, that was big. like, I feel like I'll never be the same after that, like one 1 hour. I mean, I'll never be some after writing this book, but like that one comment you made, it was just like, yeah, knowing, like remembering who I am, and like suddenly, and like stepping into it, allowing myself to just step into it. And it took me a long time, because I was like, people are going to roll their eyes at me when they see I have poetry in this, and they might still.
And I love it, so I don't who
Yeah.
cares, right?
Yeah, I finally got to that place. I'm like, you know what, if they roll their eyes because there's poetry in it, then they're not the right reader. Like, because poetry is amazing.
And I wouldn't have suggested it for every single thing either. Like, that's not your whole book, but for some specific things, it worked so well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then after that, we created the Two Fridas poem, which is just a highlight of all highlights.
Love it, love it.
Jesse
love
said
it,
we should
love
put
it
it on a poster. I was like, that's a good idea.
Yes. Yes.
So if you're listening and you have the book in front of you, because by the time that this airs, people will have it in their hands. We don't have it in our hands yet, but we will soon. The poem is about two Fridas, and it has two sides. One half of it is left justified and half of it is right justified. And like the left side is the painful side, like it is in the painting, and then the right side is more aspirational. And then each side reads as its own.
If you read each side, you can read it as its own, but you can also, it's like 3 poems in one.
Oh yeah, this is actually on the podcast, so I think yes, they have. Well, people will have already gotten that, so they might have already read that or listened to it at least. So, depending on the order in which I publish these. Yeah. Okay, so that was a big turning point. And they just unleashed all the things.
And definitely opened the door for putting your art in the book too.
Oh, I thought we were done. I was like, did we cover everything?
No, we didn't cover a very pivotal thing.
I wasn't intentionally skipping that, but my subconscious was like, let's just gloss over this part. Yeah. Yeah. So this whole book never was going to have my art in it. No, it just wasn't. My art's not good enough to put in a book, and everybody reading it will know that, and they will see that I'm a fraud. So never was my art going to be in this book.
And
and the last part 3 is all my art, and my art is all over the thing, the rest of it as decorative elements. But yeah, there was this moment of, I think it was when I was writing part 3, and I did have a chapter about me making art again. Even at one point, that my art wasn't even in that chapter. It was going to be this art that I bought from Kay Wurtzel, who's been on the podcast twice. It was going to be her painting, and how inspired I was about her, and watching her make art made me want to make art, and that's what it was going to be. And then we were in writing practice, and I remember like both you and I had this kind of the same like idea at the same time
moment. Yeah.
And then you were the one to say it. It was like, what if you put your art in the book? And I was like, I had that idea too. And it was the same.
I was trying not to say it, Heather.
I was like, I know if I say it, it's going to happen, because I know, because not because I had to, not because I have to do everything Heather tells me to do.
No.
It's because of the truth of it, of the knowing that, yes, that is the right move. And this book, the story of the book and the story of making the book has all been about following the art and following my intuition and leaning heavily into like, who am I? And how do I put that into this book? And so it was just this, okay, yeah, that's right. Then knowing that though, like I spent, I don't know how long, I don't remember, but it was a long time, like not being okay with it. knowing it was going to happen. I think it was the last thing. I think it was the last chapter that I actually wrote. Because I was just like, no, I can't fathom this yet. And so it took a lot of of what you call as pre-writing. It's just like the back of my head just kind of swirling, like, okay, this is coming. What's it going to be? I don't know what it's going to be. I don't, like eventually I will know, but right now I don't. But it was just this constant like churning in the back of my head. And then eventually it was ready to be written, but it took a long time. The poetry didn't take that long. I think I was writing poems within days, but like this one.
Well, because you honestly were having that, you were like halfway there already because of the lyrical voice that you have in your prose.
Yeah.
So you were like one step in already.
Yeah.
This was a little bit outside that.
Yeah. Because all I had been doing for, since I started making art again was working in my art journal. And I loved what everything I made in my art, not everything, but like most of the things I made in my art journal, I really loved. I thought they were wonderful. I didn't have any problem sharing them online. Which is
and that was the first part of art that you put in the book, which was the art journal.
Yeah.
Like that was the first like step into that.
Yeah. But there still was though this thing of the art journal is not enough. Like it's going to have to be like a real work of art. So there was this back of my head. I remember I was putting it off till summer. I'm like, okay, in the summer, I'm going to make the art. I'm going to make the painting that is going to be in the book. The painting will arrive and I will. So I got the paint and I got a new paint and I got an easel and I got a big canvas. I was like, I'm going to make a big painting. And I was like, I'm going to follow my intuition, just like I do in the art journal. I'm going to see what happens. And, I had all these grand ideas of like meaningful things I could do. And then I paint a white tiger. And I was like, what have I done? Why did I paint a white tiger? Why did I do that? And
why is there a tiger here? What's this have to say? What am I doing?
I know I followed my intuition. My intuition told me to use these pink, brown, and off-white because it was going to be a Scrabble board that I was going to collage onto it, which didn't end up making it onto it because my intuition said no, not to do that. And then like I had this space there and it was like this white space and I was like, something's going to be there. I just don't know what. And then like tigers kept appearing to me like multiple times, like probably 3 or 4 times over a couple days, like tigers entered my field of vision. Like, there was a podcast with Dr. Sharice Johnson. She also writes one of the blurbs in the book, but we were talking on Instagram after her episode was over about something. And then she said, free a mind. She typed it in the notes or in the message. And then it reminded me of En Vogue because a big En Vogue fan when I was a kid, like that. Free a mind.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I was like, I need to listen to that song. So I get online, I go to the music video. In the first like 10 seconds of the music video, a tiger pops on the screen, like not even a full second. It's just like, and then it just disappears. And I was like, no, what is happening? So yeah, I painted a tiger and I just felt so stupid. I really did for so long. And I was like, that is not going in this book. There's no way. And you loved it. You were like, yeah, I love this. It's so fierce. You were like rallying it for being on the cover. And I was like, no, it's not. I was like, because all I could think of is my middle school child growing up really wanted a white tiger as a pet. I thought that was awesome. So I just was like, it's a middle school girl. It's a middle school girl's dream painting. I would hang this on my wall then, but now not a serious painting.
I loved the feeling of like that fierce compassion that you were showing with that. Like that was fierce compassion to me. Like I am like fierce compassion. That's what it said to me.
Yeah. So I was like, no, this, she can't make it in there. Call her. I don't know. I should name that tiger, but it was not in the book for a long time. And I wasn't going to be. And so I was like, I'm going to make another one. That was my first try. It failed. We'll do another one. And then that one ended up being a moth. And I was like, I did know this was my third. I made another painting. It's a whale. I don't think I ever showed you my whale.
You didn't show me the whale.
Yeah. The whale. I really like the whale. I've always had an affinity for whales, but I like the whale. It's cool. it's not going to be in the book. It was like, nah, it's not. And then I painted this moth. I was like, oh, this is perfect. The moth, I have the moth in the book, the moths in the book all over the place, talk about the moth and the cocoon and the moth and the cocoon over and over again. And so I was like, yes, I'll make a moth painting. And so made a moth painting and put it in there. And I thought, okay, we're done now. And then in the very last minute, we were on the very last, it was August. And it was like, this is the final read through before we pass it off to the designer. It was like the last few days. I remember every time I would scroll through the manuscript, I would get to the moth painting and I'd scroll faster because it was just like I wanted it off the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is not.
The art is telling me something.
The art, there it is.
The art is telling me
again.
something.
Yeah,
there it is again.
And it was just like, yeah. There was that, oh, it's not good enough thing too, like which was there and valid, but there was also this like, it just wasn't right. And it wasn't me. And it was created for the wrong reasons. It was created to be good for someone to look at it to impress them. And I don't even think I succeeded at that, one, but also two, like it was not created from that place of intuition. It was created from this place of having something to prove or trying to be something I'm not. And so I was like, I'm just going to not do this. And I'm going to put something else. I'm just going to make a collage like I would do in my art journal. And I'm just going to have fun with it. I'm going to let my intuition guide me. And I'm just going to make a thing. And so I made a collage. It's no masterpiece, but it's more me than that painting was. I put the haiku that I wrote for one of the chapters earlier in the book on it. And yeah, it's just like a humble little collage. Like it's nothing special, but it was, to me, it felt good to make it, and it feels good to look at it. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, that's good. And it's a cocoon. It still has all the moth things. So I didn't have to change the chapter because you wouldn't be so late in the process. You would be like, no, we're not drastically changing this chapter. So thought we were done. And then you leave this little note on the chapter. You're like, do you think you should explain why you changed the art? Because I did say I changed it. Mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, I thought so too, but I didn't. And then I ended up writing I was like, to answer that question, I ended up writing like a whole piece that didn't fit in that chapter, but then it made its own chapter. And then we needed an artwork.
An artwork. And guess what was there?
The tiger.
That fierce tiger.
reminding me to follow my heart or follow the whatever. Like so I was laughing hysterically. And then I was like, I can't believe the tiger made it. And you're like, I always thought the tiger was gonna make it. So I do still feel a little, I guess because I haven't seen it a lot in the book yet, because like we added it so late. And so I haven't spent a lot of time really spending time with the tiger in the book. So like the tiger being the book still does feel a little bit new and raw for me. When I see it in the book, I don't know what I'm going to feel about it, but it's the right thing.
It works with the content so well and honors the process, the whole process and that you've been through. Yeah. And shows that you can, even when you're having those doubts, you can still follow the process.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter what the art ends up being, honestly.
Yeah. And it's the right thing. And I loved what I wrote with it. Like, I do really love it's a little mini chapter. And I do feel like there's so much truth in there. And there's so much, like probably so much that a lot of people listening, especially because a lot of them are art teachers and have kind of had a whole life of a relationship with art, that they do feel that sort of tug of like, who's art for? And if I make art, should it be good and sellable, or can I make it for me? Or like, there's this weirdness around art that a lot of people have. And I think that the text and that experience of taking that painting out, it really does. I think it says a lot. So it's in there for the right reasons, but that's the right art. And I'm glad the moth painting didn't make it in, because it wasn't right.
you did follow your process with that piece of art too.
I did.
It's not like you were not following that process. You followed it.
I
It was
did.
completely unexpected what happened.
Yeah, and then there was a situation over the summer too that it's not in the book, and that I realized that art helped me through, like to look at, like there was that fierce compassion that it had, that it helped me through, which I'm being vague about for a reason, but it's yeah. And yeah, like the creating it was really neat, because it's like the way the tiger came to me, and then it has these little gold bottles on it that, like, I was in a sound healing at my yoga studio, and I'm just like laying there like in the sound, and then all of a sudden in my head, like I see the painting, and then I see these like gold balls just sort of arrive on the painting, like in my imagination, and I was like, oh, that was so cool. So I knew exactly what to do next,
Well, and then there's stuff from books in there. Like
yeah.
like
Uh-huh.
there's little pieces of book
There
in
is.
there,
They're
which is awesome.
collaged.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So it's good. It is. And then, like, the way the art journals ended up kind of throughout the whole thing is just really beautiful. I'm going to have Rachel on the podcast to talk about sort of the designing of the book too.
Yeah, that'll be
We'll talk
awesome.
more about that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was so amazing of a process. It really was. And I've already started the next one. This time I don't think I'm going to bring a full book and then cut it in half. This one I feel pretty good
No, I
about.
think you won't either,
Yeah.
because now you're primed for what you want to be
Yeah.
sharing.
And it's like similar
Still,
in
it
format.
it still may change,
It still may change. Yeah.
because it always does a little bit, at least. I don't think you're
Yeah.
going to have a complete 180 or anything, but
Yeah.
I just observing the process for this long, over 25
Yeah.
years, it doesn't usually end up exactly as you think it's going to at the very beginning, but it'll probably be mostly like you think it's going to be.
Yeah. I I really kind of, every time I look back and think about, the ways this could have gone, like if I had gotten a book deal from like an art education company to write a book, um, I would have written an art education book, and I would have struggled through the whole thing, and I would have like really toiled, because it wasn't what I should have been doing. If I had just written it on my own and self-published it, and it wouldn't there wouldn't be poetry in it. I wouldn't have put my art in it, and it's like I just feel so lucky that you were part of my process, and that I got to spend all this time with you.
I thank you for that. And I feel so lucky to have been part of this process. It was so incredibly enjoyable for me. And I just loved every second of it.
Yeah. Well, hey, we did like exactly an hour, I think. That
Oh,
was
cool.
pretty good. I thought we were going to go for too long, but I think that was good. Okay.
Awesome.
So this has been one big commercial for Heather, even if you didn't know it, because someone listening to this has a book in them, and they don't know how to do it, and they know they have something to say. So if that's you listening, Heather, how can they find you?
You can find me at on Instagram as the Compassionate Writer. You can find me on Facebook also as the Compassionate Writer. You can go to my website, cmcollab.com, sign up for my newsletters, or find ways to work with me on there as well.
Yeah. And we'll have
Is
all
that
of that
good
in the
enough?
show notes. Yeah. We'll put all that in the show notes. And you can also always ask me, and I'll send you her way, because like I said, cannot recommend you highly enough. Awesome.
Thank you
Okay.
so
Well,
much.
Heather's coming back on the podcast soon we're going to talk more. I think we're going to interpret some art and or poetry. So that's coming soon too. But until then, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It was a blast, as usual.
All right, that conversation with Heather was amazing, and we had such a great time working together, and it was so fun to really reminisce on this process. If you want to pick up the book, Art is About Being Whole, just head over to artisaboutbeingwhole.com. And I hope you love the book just as much as Heather and I do. And in my next episode, I have another special guest. I have Madeline coming back to the podcast. So if you're a longtime listener, you know that Madeline and I used to do these art conversations before the podcast was officially called Art and Self. And that is really what led to a lot of what I'm doing now with both the book and the podcast. So I'm excited to welcome her back. Thank you so much for listening to Art and Self. And if you love listening to these insightful conversations and want more connected content about connecting with art, I invite you to check out my new book, Art is About Being Whole, a memoir, coming out on October 31st, 2023. You can get more information and sign up for book updates at artisaboutbeingwhole.com. Also, please consider leaving me a rating or a review on iTunes and share this episode with one friend who needs to hear what we talked about today. You'll find links to the artworks we discussed over on the show notes, and you can find me on Instagram and Facebook by searching Cindy Ingram Art and Self. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next time.